GraceandTruthRadio.world proudly presents Life Coaching for Men, improving their relationships with their wives and learning to communicate for a more fulfilling and satisfying marriage. And now, Men Loving Well, with Christian counselor, author, and relationship coach, Dr. Jim Slaughter.
Welcome, everyone, to the Men Loving Well show. We're a few days past Father's Day, but this program will have a special message to fathers and to men everywhere. My special guest today is Greg Matthews. Greg has been a U.S. Air Force and civilian firefighter, emergency medical technician, special operations rescue technician, rescue helicopter pilot, fugitive recovery agent, World Trade Center attack first responder, and international consultant on emergency management and security. He currently serves as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Southwestern Division Anti-Terrorism Officer, and he's the founder of Chase What Matters Ministry. Greg, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it is great having you. I've been looking forward to it a lot. As if your life wasn't already filled with enough risk and adventure, in September of 2015, during a hunting trip to Alaska, you were attacked, mauled, and nearly killed by a grizzly bear. You've just written a book about the attack entitled Wild Awakening, How a Raging Grizzly Healed My Wounded Heart. Greg, tell us about the attack and what God showed you through it, would you?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with your audience today.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I've been really looking forward to it.
Great. It's great having you.
It's been 3.5 years since the attack, and since the probably 2 weeks after I returned, just trying to figure out how to process what happened to me out there. Not only the attack, but also when God showed up in a very miraculous way. I began to write, and it's been 3.5 years. And when you begin to write, and then you get contracted for a book, pretty much the idea, the story is it's all contained, meaning that they don't want it to go out. And so I'm just so thankful that men like you are interested in hearing the story, because it is a story, but it's also a message that I've been so anxious to share with men and their families.
When you sent us the pre-publication copy, Ann and I both read it, and we just read right through it. I mean, we were stunned. We were moved in many different ways, and the power of God comes through so strongly in it that we were really just overcome by that. So
that touches my heart, and it shows what, having lived it and then taking, not literally, but pen to paper to try and transfer everything that I was feeling emotionally and everything that God did, and trying to extrapolate everything. One, so I could there was a little bit of insanity there in the sense of just going through that grizzly attack. Obviously, it was tremendously traumatizing. Having been a firefighter for 21 years, I've treated a lot of people on their worst days.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of times there's a lot of blood. There's often death. And although it's not our emergency, we're there to be able to try and do what we can. But when I was faced with the injuries that I sustained from that grizzly, I was out for the count had God not shown up and given my brother the bravery to re-engage that bear, as it was. I was mauled for over 2 minutes. He ended up coming up to it, heard it from about 50 yards away, where he was making the moose calls. It's typically how you hunt moose. I was hunting with a bow. He's a 12-year resident, retired Air Force. He's got 5 children and a wonderful wife. And a lot of what they do is they eat off the land, whether it's moose, bear, caribou. But I wanted to make sure and level the playing field. It's not about the kill for me at all. It's about being in the woods. It's about being in God's creation. It's a challenge of being able to support logistically what you need to go into someplace for 10 days. I mean, we're talking about the wilderness in Alaska, where it seems like everything wants to hurt you out there in Alaska. There's a lot of different things, whether it's wolves or grizzlies or black bears, and you have to be prepared. So when that incident happened, when he got up to me, the bear had my leg in his mouth and was moving all over me. It would drop my leg and then it would move around and bite me and lift me up and drag me. And the bear was in between my brother and I on the ground. Mm-hmm. And he literally said that there was nothing brave going on there. That was just reactionary fighting for my life. Right. And he said there were sounds coming out of me that sounded almost inhuman. Mm. If you can imagine first we're talking about God's apex predator, basically what I call a land great white.
Yeah, right.
It's basically that. And when I saw that thing, and I could tell right away that it was hunting based on the calls that we were making, mm-hmm. I was very, very thankful that I had made a decision seeing bear scat on the beach when we got out of the boat to grab my rifle. I actually started walking away thinking, no, I won't need it. And saw the second pile of scat, and I thought, well, I'm just going to grab it just in case. And that was one of the miracles that actually happened. Mm-hmm. That God gave me the wisdom to be able to bring that tool.
And there were many miracles during all of this.
Oh, there was tremendous miracles. That was there were small, medium, and large miracles all the way around. And I'm so glad that God showed up. Oh. Wanting to be responsible to my readers, because the book doesn't release until June 18th.
Right.
I want to make sure and talk enough about it to let people know that, yes, it is a book, a personal account of dealing with and the aftermath of a grizzly attack. There's really, even words don't quite bring home what it's like to have something that looked like a pickup truck coming at you and having it go into slow motion. And there was 3 bullets, 1 from me and 2 from my brother, that went into that grizzly. And it didn't even faze it. Mm. And we're talking a 300 Winchester Magnum, 200 grain round that I reloaded myself. That was another thing that played with my mind, was I actually put the powder, set the primer, set the bullet in the bullets or the cartridges that eventually would kill that bear. It didn't kill it at the time. And we were basically trying to survive against it. We didn't want this confrontation, but it showed up, and it was, there was no hesitation when it saw me. It was unbelievable. I could not believe it was going on. I will tell you, there's been a lot of questions about what is it like to have something like that in a rage so big, so overwhelming, and to have those teeth. I will tell you, the first bite, the paws were about 10 to 12 inches across.
Good night.
The claws were about 3.5 inches long. And so when it placed its hands or its paws, after it knocked the wind out of me on the ground and placed its paws on my shoulders, there was no room even for my chest. That's how big the paws were. And the first bite was to my face. My face exploded in blood. There was an opening in my throat. It was about the size of a tennis ball in my throat. And the teeth went straight through my cheeks, into my gums, and straight through my jaw. When it bit down, it tore from about mid-level on my nose all the way down through my mouth and split my lip and face, basically split it down. I wasn't sure what the bear came away with. My first thought is my face is gone. And it had my head in its mouth 2 different times, the whole back of my head completely in its mouth 2 different times. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear. My ears were ringing because I was going into shock. Plus, I just fired on that thing. That 300 Win Mag is loud, so it was having trouble. So not only at the worst possible moment, my vision was gone and my hearing was gone. And there was this thing working around me, almost like a boxer would work around another boxer, trying to pick the most vulnerable point and then just diving onto it, biting it, lifting me up, throwing me around.
Oh,
and
great.
It was simply unbelievable. And of course, my brother says 2 minutes. I was like, "Are you sure you don't mean 2 years?" Because
had to feel like that,
right? It seemed like it just went on and on and on and on. At one point, I can remember just trying to grab anything I could as my fingers were digging into the soil as it was dragging me away. And the only thing I could think was that this thing was dragging me into the brush so it could start feeding. You know?
Yes.
And so I'm trying to, I can't see, I can't hear. It's dragging me, and I'm thinking at this point, it's over. And I'm also wondering, where's my brother at? Because I have no understanding of time at this point. All I'm doing is trying to survive.
Right. I will say that when I read that story, I read the book and the part about the attack, it was one of the most horrifying stories that I've ever read or heard. And in my mind, I had vivid images as you painted the picture in the book of what was happening. Okay. Mm. And I told Ann, I said, this is like a horror movie or something, it's adventure. Yeah, but it's more than that. And you should be dead, Greg.
Absolutely.
And God saved you.
He spared my life.
Yeah.
He absolutely spared my life. And it was, in order to understand the magnitude of what it meant, God showing up when he did, and just in the nick of time, I think I need to share with your audience what the power of a father wound.
Yes.
And the more people that I talk to, the more men I talk to, and a lot of times it's one-on-one. I think the Lord has given a comfort level to my voice and being able to be transparent and being able to share my woundings, that at times it can resonate courage that allows men to overcome things that we often hide from or compartmentalize. Mm-hmm. Unwilling to even talk about that because the world doesn't accept weakness in a man. The world doesn't accept tears. The world, even though it's impossible to fulfill, they will not let you feel. They will not let you bring that pain and that wounding out because we're all trying to polish the outside. And I mean, and that's the truth because when men talk, within the first 5 minutes, it typically comes to, what do you do for a living?
Right.
Right? Am I correct there?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And you know why? It's because men, part of that is their how they've been created in God. Mm-hmm. There are elements that we've been given that are brought to becoming a man and aspiring to be a man and accomplishing and doing things. Mm-hmm. But absent of a father guiding us, meaning a relationship with God, the Father, those motivations turn into what I've seen in me is an exterior polishing of a man through achievements, accomplishments, and because when we stand next to those men, whether it's in our workplace or at the barbecue, men are so driven by pride in a lot of ways that we focus that as being the main thing to accomplish in our life, and we miss so much. And the only reason I know that is because of that Grizzly attack. God used that Grizzly attack to really give me some insight on what it means to be a man, a father, and a husband. my bona fides, it's almost embarrassing now that I look at. My heart was for people to be there when no one else would be, late at night, on icy roads, in storms.
Right.
You show up and you are there because they are in a state of pain, anguish, and nobody's there. They're injured, they're trapped. And I really, that resonates with me because that's the exact feeling as, and I preface this with, my dad is my best friend today. We live in a broken world, making broken decisions. Even Christians like you and I, we still make bad decisions.
Yes, we do.
And we still, but thank God that we have His presence, His relationship, His gift, His sacrifice, and mostly His grace. That's what I love grace. I love studying grace. But when I stood on that sidewalk after my brothers and I, my dad was very much an alpha male. We taught him into our adulthood how to love, how to say I love you, hugs. But he wasn't raised that way.
Right.
And so he was my hero. He was my anchor. I'm sure like many men out there, dads hold a very special place and a very special part in our lives. A lot of times they are the anchor to us boys in growing up. And that's exactly who my dad was to me. And so after carrying boxes, and we were all in competition to carry these boxes from the house into the car, we saw my dad carrying, hey, can we help? It's exciting. We want to help Dad. And because we know there wasn't a hug or a kiss involved there from my dad, but there was a wink and a smile and that affirmation that just made our hearts burst. Literally. It made our hearts burst. And so our hearts burst in a different way this day. We were standing on the sidewalk. We had loaded my dad's car. And I remember him walking around with his head hung down. And my dad carries his head high. He is a California High Patrolman, NCIS agent, United States Marine. I mean, my dad's he's a great man. And I knew that even then at 8 years old. But when he was hanging his head and he stopped at the car door, I was like, Dad, what's wrong? And he looked up and I knew something bad. Something was wrong. And he said, I love you boys very, very much. He said, but your mom and I are not going to be living together anymore, and I'm going to be living somewhere else. And my brother, Shane, screamed out to my dad, don't leave, Dad. I didn't even have the courage to say that, although I was screaming it inside of me. And I saw the door open, I saw him get in there, I saw him start the car, and he drove away. And I watched, and he never looked back. And it was the most devastating moment that I'd ever been through in my limited 8 years. But it put on me some lies of the enemy that I just overlaid on my heart, and it just fit together absolutely. And because I was just so limited as a small boy who had just lost his dad, I didn't know how to process that. I can't tell you what I was feeling, but what I knew for a fact in my heart was the fact that I did something seriously wrong, and this is what happened. My parents were not going to be together anymore.
That all of this was your fault.
Yeah. That my dad, I did something so bad that he couldn't even tell me.
Wow.
And that I was at fault for this, and that I was not valued enough or loved enough for my dad to stick around. And so, if you can imagine, there was after that, and I told myself, if dads can leave, anybody can leave. I will never let anybody that close. I will hold everyone at arm's length. I'll let you in only so far. And so that set a course of life events where I spent the rest of my life trying to prove to my dad and prove to the world that I was worthy of being loved. And the only reason that I can talk and express this is because I was brought to the brink of death, and I looked over the edge, and none of the stuff that I had done in my life, career-wise or anything else, meant anything to me. There was no value. I was not rolling over and saying, you know what, I've led a great life, I've accomplished this, and I'm ready to go. No, that was not even the case. The thing is, there's so many men out there, and it doesn't have to be that devastating. Father wounds can take any shape. Like abandonment. Abandonment your dad can be in the house and you can feel abandoned.
That's true.
He may not even acknowledge you. He may be too, there may be alcohol involved or drugs.
Right.
Or there may be brokenness in the marriage unit with your mom and dad where there's fighting. Or you may be, quote, I've heard so many times, yeah, I'm the mistake. I came later and they weren't expecting me. My dad calls me the mistake. And you know, there's a lot of father wounds, and I absolutely know for a fact, just based on my history, that it deeply impacts boys growing up. And the self-esteem, the love, the anchor, the foundation that should be from your dad. My dad was broken like so many other dads out there. He didn't know the Lord. He was making decisions that he thought was best for us, that he didn't want us to be around fighting. He was doing it out of love. And you know what? His love, and I will tell you, your audience right now, that those lies of the enemy that you believe from childhood is exactly that. Those are lies. My dad, his love never changed for me. He wasn't mad at me. He didn't. But I took that because we don't have the ability to process it. It's like having a bolt of electricity shoot through an electrical system. We just don't know how to process it. And the path of least resistance is, all I know is I'm a bad boy and I'm just not worthy of love. And to go through life like that was such a heavy burden, and so many people paid the price for me having to be the best. Because if somebody is the best, that means somebody's not the best. And around you, I was just striving to feel whole. I wasn't trying to hurt people. I was just trying to feel whole and to feel.
Right.
Literally to feel. And going through all that throughout my life, the World Trade Center deeply, deeply changed me. But it pushed me into another realm. I became one of the Homeland Security managers for the city of San Diego, protecting 1.1 million people. I was so far out of my element. I had a passion. I had retooled and reschooled for anti-terrorism and counter-terrorism. And the Lord just continued to anoint me and bless me and provide the opportunities of what my heart cried out for, because he knew how broken I was. But in the end, I have to know that he was waiting for that point in September of 2015 when he showed up, because of the fact that I was out for the count. Because of that brokenness throughout my whole life from the father wound, I always believed, because I never let anybody close enough, I never thought I could ask for help because I never trusted anybody to be there. When I felt the pain I was, and I knew how badly I was injured, and that I could possibly take my next breath and that would be my last, I said, it's done. There's no one else that can show up. Greg Matthews can only go so far, and Greg Matthews is tired, and I can't do anything else. And you know what? Absolutely right at that point, not that he wasn't there before, but that's when it became very, very clear when God showed up. because that's exactly where God had to take me, was to the point where I give up. I can't do it anymore. I got saved in high school. It's not that I didn't have my relationship, my walk with Jesus Christ. I'm going to heaven and I'm raising my family in the Lord. And I know exactly what the Romans road looks like. And I love the Lord deeply. But from brokenness and wounding, I could only let him so far in. And he knew that. But when I was on my back and I was pretty much succumbed to dying, he said, Greg, he says, I'm not done with you yet. You need to fight. And it was clear as a bell, audible. And I knew the Lord showed up. I was still feeling unworthy, and that somehow that he was just going to show up and leave. And but you know what? From there, I can tell you there's at least 15 to 20 individual physical miracles that took place after that. And he also gave me a vision that inspired me. And I'll just let your listeners wonder what that is until they read the book. But there was an actual vision that took place that he gave me. And you have to understand, I thought absolutely that I was going to die.
Right.
And it was through that whole thing and through the series of miracles, and I was covered in blood. There wasn't a part of me that was covered in blood, and more blood was coming. There were some decisions that needed to be made. The clarity of mind in that situation could only have come from God. The blood loss and everything that had occurred, plus being wet now with blood. It was cold. Hypothermia was starting to set in. And I still had a 1.5 mile walk back to the boat.
Right. I don't know how you made that, Greg. Except
well,
by
I do.
God's power.
It was the Lord's power that allowed that.
Yep.
And there's so many details in that I hope as you folks, please know this, that there is a grizzly on the front of this thing, and a grizzly is a part of this book. But I can tell you from everyone who has read the book that they expected one thing, and they have all said that the book is profound in the way that it unwraps the broken heart of a little boy, and how God the Father restores that heart to not only with his Father in heaven, but his Father on earth.
That's our show for today. Go and be a really good husband and love well.